The first light of dawn bled slowly across the desert horizon, spilling over the red mesas and the empty prairie that led into the little town of Red Mesa. Dust hung in the air like a breath that refused to fade. The ground was hard, cracked by heat and hoofprints. Somewhere, a coyote called, its cry swallowed by the hum of voices that gathered in the square. Tala stood barefoot on the rough wooden platform, her wrists bound together with coarse rope that had rubbed her skin raw. The chill of the early morning clung to her skin, but the cold wasn't what made her tremble. Around her, men in wide-brimmed hats shifted in the dust, trading jokes and coins, while the auctioneer's assistant arranged the line of captives like cattle waiting for sale. The girl kept her eyes low, staring at the sand beneath her feet. Each grain glimmered faintly in the rising light, and for a moment she imagined it was the riverbed of her home, where her mother had once taught her to weave baskets and sing. She could still hear her mother's voice, soft as wind through pine needles, whispering, "Whatever they take, they can't take your spirit." Tala held on to that memory like a prayer, even as the voices around her grew sharper. "Apache girl," someone muttered. "She'll fetch a decent price. Small, but strong." Another spat tobacco onto the ground. "Better to break her spirit first. These savages don't learn easy." The auctioneer clapped his hands for silence. "All right, gentlemen, let's not waste daylight. First up, the little one here. She's young, healthy, and can work. The trader says she's good with a needle and knows her way around a fire." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The smell of sweat, whiskey, and smoke mixed with the faint sweetness of hay. Tala lifted her head just enough to see the faces. Some amused, some indifferent, some cruel. She searched for mercy and found none. The auctioneer tugged her arm roughly. "Speak, girl. Tell these fine men what you can do." Her voice cracked from dryness, but she forced herself to answer. "I can cook," she whispered. "So clean." "Louder!" the man barked. She swallowed hard, her throat burning. "I can cook, sew, clean. I'll be anything you need." For a heartbeat, silence hung over the square. Then came laughter, harsh and mocking, echoing off the saloon walls. One of the traders called out, "Anything we need, huh? Maybe we should test that first." More laughter. Tala's stomach twisted. Shame washed over her, but she refused to cry. She straightened her back, trying to remember her mother's words. The rope bit into her wrists. The sun climbed higher, painting her skin in gold, but she felt only the weight of eyes that saw her as something less than human. Among the crowd, standing a little apart from the others, was a man named Elias Hart. He was tall, his shoulders broad from years of working the land. His hat shaded a face lined with dust and time. He had come to Red Mesa that morning for feed, not for people. But as the girl spoke, as her trembling voice carried over the laughter, something in him stopped. He remembered another morning, years ago, when his wife's hand had been warm in his. They had stood at their door watching the sunrise. "Don't turn away from what's right, Eli," she'd said. "The world's cruel enough without good men hiding from it." He had turned away too many times since then, from starving beggars, from orphans, from the lonely ache that followed her death. But this morning, her voice seemed to return with the dawn itself. The auctioneer barked, $2 to start. "Who'll give me 2? A merchant raised his hand lazily. "2. 3, another called. "3.50, said a third, grinning like a man at a poker game. Elias felt his jaw tighten. He wanted to leave. He had no place here, no reason to care, but he couldn't move. Something about the girl's stillness, her refusal to bow even when mocked, reminded him of a wild colt he'd once saved from a snare. The bidding went on. $5. 6. Then silence. The crowd was losing interest. She wasn't the type to fetch much profit. The auctioneer sighed. "Come now, gentlemen. She's strong. Look at her arms." Tala barely heard him. Her eyes blurred with exhaustion. The night before, she hadn't slept. She had prayed for death, then prayed for something kinder. From the back of the crowd, Elias spoke, low, almost to himself. 7. The auctioneer blinked. $7 from the gentleman in the hat. Any higher? No one answered. Sold. The gavel struck the wood with a sharp crack. Tala flinched. The rope was cut. For the first time in days, her wrists were free, though her skin burned where the fibers had bitten deep. Elias stepped forward. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything at all. He just reached into his coat, counted the coins, and placed them in the auctioneer's palm. The man shrugged, pocketed the money, and turned away. Tala waited, unsure whether to thank him or fear him. When she finally dared to look up, Elias's eyes met hers. Pale blue, steady, and unexpectedly gentle. "You'll come with me," he said quietly. His voice was deep, gravelly from years of dust and silence. "Yes, sir," she murmured. He hesitated. "Name's Elias, not sir." "Tala," she said softly. "My name is Tala." They walked past the crowd. The same men who had laughed now stepped aside, some muttering, some sneering. The trader called out, "You'll regret that, Hart. She's wild blood." "They never learn." Elias didn't answer. He only led her toward his horse, a chestnut mare with a calm, intelligent eye. He lifted her up onto the saddle before mounting behind her. She sat stiffly, uncertain, clutching the worn leather with both hands. As they rode out of town, the morning wind swept through her tangled hair. The town's noise faded behind them until all that remained was the rhythmic sound of hooves on dry earth. The desert stretched endless and empty before them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, softly, Elias asked, "You know how to ride?" "A little," she said. "Well enough to stay seated?" "I'll try." "That's all anyone can do," he muttered. The sun climbed higher, bathing the plains in gold. Cactus shadows stretched long. They passed dry riverbeds and the skeletons of old wagons. Occasionally he glanced back to make sure she was still upright. At midday they stopped by a trickle of water that cut through the rocks. Elias handed her a canteen. "Drink," she obeyed, sipping cautiously. He noticed how she cupped the rim with both hands as if the metal might bite. "You got family somewhere?" he asked. She shook her head. "They're gone." He didn't press. Some pains didn't need words. When they reached his ranch by sunset, the sky was burning orange. The house was small, built of weathered timber, surrounded by empty corrals. No laughter, no smoke from the chimney, just silence and the faint creak of the windmill turning slow. Tala looked around nervously. "You live alone?" "Been that way for a while," he said. She nodded, unsure what to do next. He dismounted, untied the saddlebag, and gestured to the porch. "You can rest inside. There's food, water by the basin." She hesitated. "What do you want me to do?" He paused halfway through, unbuckling his belt. "What do you mean?" "Work, clean, cook, whatever you need." He stared at her for a moment, his brow furrowing. "You don't owe me that." "But you bought me." "I didn't buy you to own you." She looked away, confused. "Then why?" He tugged his hat lower. "Maybe because someone had to." He walked toward the barn, leaving her standing on the porch. The door creaked as she stepped inside. Dust motes drifted in the fading light. Everything smelled of leather, hay, and the faint ghost of tobacco. On the table sat a tin plate, an old photograph of a woman, and a cracked mug. Tala traced her fingers over the photograph. The woman was young, smiling, her hand resting on Elias's arm. She looked kind. The girl whispered, "Your wife?" Elias's voice came from the doorway. "Was." She turned quickly. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "So am I." That night, the wind rose again. Thunder rolled far off across the mesas. Tala lay on a cot by the window, watching lightning flicker on the horizon. The rain smelled like wet earth and smoke. In the next room, she could hear Elias pacing, his boots slow against the floorboards. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother, of home, of the sound of drums under the moon. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Elias stood by the window, staring into the storm. His mind replayed the girl's voice, the way she had stood so proud even in chains. He thought of his wife's words, "Don't turn away from what's right." For the first time in years, something inside him felt alive again, though it hurt to feel it. He poured himself a measure of whiskey, stared at it, then set it down untouched. The storm outside cracked the sky open. He stepped out onto the porch, letting the rain hit his face. It was cold, but cleansing. Somewhere in the darkness, the faint sound of a woman's voice reached his ears. Tala, humming softly, singing an old Apache melody that rose and fell like the wind itself. The sound pierced him. It wasn't sorrowful. It was something older, deeper, a song of survival. He stood there listening until the thunder rolled away and the night grew still again. Hours passed. When he finally lay down, sleep wouldn't come. The image of her standing on that platform haunted him. The look in her eyes. The words she'd spoken. "I'll be anything you need." He didn't want anyone to have to say that ever again. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the edge of the sky, Elias made up his mind. If there was any chance to give her back what the world had taken, he would do it. Maybe that was all redemption really was, doing one thing right, even if you'd done 100 wrong before. He rose, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the earth damp from the storm. The light was soft, still pink from the sleeping sun. He looked toward the town in the distance, a dark smudge beneath the glowing horizon. The same place that had taken her freedom might now witness the start of something different. He saddled his horse slowly, tightening the straps with steady hands. Inside the house, Tala stirred in her sleep, unaware of the choice that had already been made for both their lives. Elias swung into the saddle, the leather creaking beneath his weight, and turned his horse toward the east. The wind picked up as he rode, carrying the scent of rain and sage. Behind him, the ranch lay quiet, an empty shell waiting to be filled. Ahead, the road shimmered with the first gold of morning. The town was waking. The same men would be there, the same dust, the same cruelty. But this time he would not stand apart. He would stand between. The horizon flared brighter. Elias's eyes narrowed against the light. The reins tightened in his hands. Whatever came next, he knew it would begin at dawn. And so he rode on into the new day, the promise of redemption burning quietly in his chest, like the sun rising over the red mesas of the west. The sun was already sliding down the sky when Elias led Tala through the open gate of his ranch. The windmill turned slow and lazy in the distance, creaking like an old man's sign. The air smelled of dry grass and the faint sweetness of mesquite. The house stood alone against the wide plain, its paint long gone, its windows coated with dust that shimmered in the fading light. Tala sat stiffly in the saddle, her hands folded tight in her lap. Her wrists were raw where the ropes had been, and though she was free now, her mind still trembled like a leaf that had forgotten the feel of wind. She had not spoken a word since they left Red Mesa. She had watched the horizon instead. The endless roll of the desert that once belonged to her people and now belonged to no one. When Elias stopped his horse, the sudden quiet was almost too much. She climbed down carefully, her bare feet touching the cool dirt. She didn't know whether to follow or wait, so she stood there unsure. Elias untied the saddlebag and slung it over his shoulder. "You can go inside," he said quietly. "The door is not locked." She hesitated, glancing toward the porch. The house looked tired, like it had been waiting too long for someone to speak within its walls. She took one cautious step, then another. The boards creaked under her feet. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and smoke. A single chair leaned against the wall. A small table sat beneath a window streaked with dust. A pot hung over the hearth, long cold. Everything felt abandoned, like a memory left behind. Elias followed her in, removing his hat. His boots made soft thuds on the floorboards. "Ain't much," he said, "but it's dry, and it's safe." Tala looked around slowly. She touched the edge of the table, feeling the smooth grooves worn into the wood. "It's quiet," she said. He nodded. "Been that way a long time." She turned toward him. "Where's your family?" His eyes flicked toward the photograph on the mantel. "Gone," he said simply. There was a pause. Then, softly, she said, "Mine, too." The silence that followed was heavy but not cruel. It was the silence of two people who had already lost more than words could measure. Elias busied himself with the hearth, striking a match to light a small fire. The flames sputtered to life, crackling softly. The warmth reached her face, gentle and strange. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded once. He ladled stew from a pot that had sat all day on the stove, reheating it. The smell filled the room. Beef, onion, a faint hint of sage. He handed her a tin bowl. She took it with both hands and murmured, "Thank you." They ate in silence. Outside, night gathered over the plains, stars pricking through the sky one by one. The firelight painted Elias's face in gold and shadow, making him look older and softer all at once. When she finished, she set the bowl down and looked into the flames. "You bought me," she said quietly, "but you said I'm not yours." He leaned back in his chair. "That's right. Then what am I to you?" He thought for a long time before answering. Someone who deserved better. She looked at him, unsure if she should believe that. Why? Because no one should have to beg to be treated like a person. Her throat tightened. The fire crackled louder, filling the space between them. Elias stood and walked to the small cupboard, pulling out a folded blanket. "You can sleep in here tonight. I'll take the porch." She shook her head. "No, I can." He raised a hand. "Don't argue. It's settled." He left her with the fire and stepped outside. The night air was cool, the kind that carried the smell of rain long before it came. He sat on the porch steps, listening to the wind and the distant howl of coyotes. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. Inside, Tala spread the blanket on the floor and lay down near the hearth. She watched the fire until her eyes blurred. Her body ached, but her mind wouldn't rest. She thought of her tribe, of her mother's hands weaving cloth by firelight, of laughter now lost to the dust. And then, against her will, she thought of the man outside, the one who had cut her ropes and looked at her without hatred. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind sighing through the open cracks of the house. In the morning, the smell of coffee woke her. Elias was already up, standing by the stove. Sunlight spilled through the window, turning the dust in the air to gold. "Morning," he said, pouring a cup. She sat up quickly. "Good morning." He gestured toward the counter. "There's bread and jerky if you're hungry." She thanked him and ate quietly, her eyes darting around the room. It still didn't feel real. To wake without fear, to eat without someone watching over her like a prize. After breakfast, she followed him outside. The ranch stretched wide in every direction, the fences half fallen, the fields dry but not dead. "You ever work with horses?" he asked. She nodded. "A little. My people use them for hunting." "Then you'll do fine." He handed her a brush. "Start with her. Name's June." Tala approached the mare slowly, speaking softly in her own language. The horse flicked its ears, then relaxed. Elias watched, surprised. She moved with calm confidence, the same way he did when gentling a spooked colt. "You got a good hand," he said. Tala smiled faintly. "Animals don't lie." "No," he agreed. "People do enough of that for everyone." They worked in silence for hours, the sound of brushing and hoofsteps mingling with the wind. By midday she was sweating, her hair clinging to her face. Elias brought her water, watching as she drank. "You don't have to work yourself ragged," he said. "I want to," she replied. "If I work, I stay. You don't have to earn your place here." She met his eyes. "Then let me feel like I can." He didn't argue. He just nodded and handed her another tool. Days passed like that, slow, steady, filled with quiet labor. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, feeding the animals, fetching water, patching fences. At night, she cooked simple meals, always leaving the first portion for him. He protested once, and she only smiled. "Where I come from," she said, "the one who saves your life eats first." He didn't know how to answer that, so he accepted the bowl and ate in silence. Gradually, the distance between them began to shrink. She laughed once when his old dog tried to steal a biscuit from her hand, and the sound startled them both. It had been so long since laughter had lived in that house that even the walls seemed to lean closer to hear it. Sometimes, in the evenings, Elias caught her humming softly while she worked. Old songs he didn't understand, but found himself wanting to. One night he asked her what the words meant. "They're about the sun," she said, "and about finding home again." He nodded. "Seems fitting." The town whispered, of course. When he rode in for supplies, men made jokes behind his back. "Heart's gone soft," one said. "Took in an Apache girl. Guess he needs someone to warm the bed." Elias ignored them, but their words burned. On his next trip, he saw Tala waiting outside the general store, head bowed as the shopkeeper refused to serve her. He dismounted, his boots hitting the ground hard. "You got a problem here, Frank?" he asked. The man shrugged. "Don't serve her kind. You serve mine? Course. Then you serve hers. She's with me." Frank hesitated, eyes flicking from Elias's glare to Tala's silent face. Finally, he grumbled and filled the order. Elias handed her the bag without a word. That night, she set his dinner on the table, her hands trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. He looked up. "Done what?" "Made them angry." "They were already angry," he said. "Now they just know it doesn't matter." She didn't answer. But when she looked at him, there was something new in her eyes. Something soft and uncertain. Gratitude. Maybe even trust. Later, he sat outside watching the stars while she tidied the kitchen. The air was cool, the sky wide enough to swallow everything. He heard the faint scrape of her footsteps as she came to stand beside him. "It's beautiful here," she said. "It's empty," he replied. "Empty can be beautiful," she whispered. He turned to her. The firelight from inside the house caught the curve of her face, the deep brown of her eyes, the faint scar near her temple. She was still so young, yet her gaze carried more sorrow than most men could bear. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. So he just nodded and looked back at the horizon. When he finally went inside, she was still standing there, her face tilted toward the stars, her lips moving in silent prayer. That night, the wind blew hard against the shutters. Elias lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The sound of rain began again, steady and soft. He thought of her out there under the same roof, of how she had come into his life like a storm, unwanted, unexpected, but cleansing. He didn't know what this feeling was. This warmth that wasn't pity, this quiet that wasn't loneliness. All he knew was that when she smiled, even a little, the old ghosts inside his heart went quiet. In the other room, Tala dreamed of a river. She saw herself standing in its current, the water washing away the dust of the past. On the far bank, a figure waited, tall, silent, with eyes like pale blue skies. He held out his hand, and for once, she wasn't afraid to reach back. Morning came with the smell of damp earth. Elias stepped out to the porch and watched the light break across the plains. Behind him, Tala stirred, her footsteps soft on the floorboards. "Coffee?" he asked without turning. "Yes, please," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. For the first time, he smiled. Not out of politeness, not out of duty, but because it felt right. And as the sun rose higher, its light spilling over the ranch like a promise, both of them, the lonely rancher and the girl once sold at dawn, began to believe that maybe this place, this fragile peace between them, was the start of something neither had dared to hope for. The days turned to weeks, and the ranch began to breathe again. Grass that had grown wild under the fences was cut and stacked neatly. The barns smelled of hay instead of dust. The horses were brushed to a shine, their coats gleaming beneath the sun. Somewhere in the middle of all that quiet work, Tala began to hum while she labored. At first it was soft, barely more than the murmur of the wind, but soon it filled the space like something alive again. Elias didn't say anything about it, but every time he heard her humming, the corners of his mouth lifted just a little. He would find excuses to work nearby, mending the porch rail, checking the hinges on the barn door, just to listen. It had been so long since his home had sounded like anything but silence. In the mornings, she would wake before dawn, lighting the fire and brewing coffee the way she had seen him do. She'd sweep the floor, wash the tin plates, and sometimes step out barefoot into the cold to feed the chickens. He'd watch her from the window, hands in his pockets, thinking she looked like a sunrise he didn't deserve to see. One morning, he said, "You don't have to do all that before I'm up." She looked over her shoulder. "If I wait, the day's half gone." He grinned faintly. "You work harder than most men I've hired." She tilted her head. "You don't hire anyone." He nodded. "Maybe that's the trouble." That made her smile as she went back to scattering feed. By mid-spring, the weather warmed. The days stretched long and golden, the kind of light that makes the world seem gentler than it really is. Tala learned the rhythm of ranch life the way one learns a new song. Her hands grew calloused but sure. She learned to mend fences, to handle a skittish colt, to cook bread that didn't burn at the edges. She learned, too, how to laugh again, though the sound still surprised her when it came. Elias found himself talking more than he had in years. At first, it was small things. The weather, the horses, which tools were sharp and which were dull. But slowly, stories began to spill out. How he'd built the house with his own hands, how the first winter after his wife died, he'd almost sold the place, how he'd once tried to teach a wild stallion to trust and got thrown clean through the corral fence. Tala listened quietly, her eyes steady, her smile patient. She didn't ask for more than he wanted to give, and somehow that made him want to give everything. Sometimes she told him stories too, soft, rhythmic tales from her people, spoken in the calm voice of memory. She told him about the river where she was born, the dance of fireflies at dusk, the songs sung to guide lost spirits home. Elias didn't understand the words when she slipped into her language, but he didn't need to. The sound itself carried meaning enough. One evening, as they worked side by side patching the barn roof, the sun burned red over the hills. Tala brushed a strand of hair from her face and laughed. "You missed a nail," she said. He looked down, squinting. "Guess my eyes ain't what they used to be." "Then you need younger ones to help you see." He raised an eyebrow. "You volunteering?" "Maybe," she said, grinning. Her laughter caught him off guard. Light, real, unguarded. It echoed through the rafters and did something to his chest he couldn't quite name. He looked at her longer than he meant to. The sunlight hit her skin and turned it to bronze. She noticed his stare and turned away, suddenly shy. They climbed down from the roof when the last light faded, their hands streaked with dust. As they walked back toward the house, their shoulders brushed and neither moved away. That night, after dinner, they sat on the porch together. The stars were clear and sharp, scattered like salt across the black sky. Elias poured 2 mugs of coffee, handing her one. She held it close, breathing in the warmth. "Doesn't it get lonely out here?" she asked. "It used to," he said. "Now it just feels quiet." "Quiet can be lonely too." He nodded. "Sometimes." He hesitated, then added, "But not lately." She looked at him, eyes soft. The wind lifted her hair, and he had to look away before he did something foolish, like reach out and touch it. From somewhere far off came the faint sound of coyotes. Tala shivered slightly and drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. He noticed and, without thinking, slid his own coat from his shoulders and draped it around her. Their hands brushed. She froze. So did he. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, voice low. "You're welcome." For a moment, the world felt still, only the sound of wind and the soft clink of the coffee mug in her hands. He could smell the faint sweetness of her hair, the firelight dancing on her cheek. Then she said, almost too softly to hear, "Why did you never marry again?" He stared into the distance. "Didn't seem right." "Because of her?" "Because I thought love only came once." "And now?" she asked. He hesitated, his voice rough when it came. "Now I don't know what to think." The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. She sipped her coffee and stared out into the dark. Somewhere in her chest, something unfamiliar stirred. Warm, frightening, alive. The days that followed carried that new quiet between them. It wasn't tension, not exactly. It was awareness. The way her eyes met his and held a little longer than before. The way his hand brushed hers when they passed tools. The way the space between them seemed to hum with something unspoken. But the world beyond their ranch was not so quiet. Word traveled fast in Red Mesa. The sight of Elias Hart and the Apache girl working side by side had stirred tongues. Some said he'd gone soft. Others whispered uglier things. One afternoon, Elias rode into town for supplies. Tala waited by the general store, her head lowered beneath her shawl. A group of men leaned near the saloon, watching. One spat on the ground. "Didn't know Hart kept company now," he sneered. Another laughed. Maybe he got tired of sleeping alone. Elias's jaw clenched. He said nothing, just loaded the sacks onto his wagon. But when they started toward the ranch, he could feel Tala's silence pressing beside him. "They don't know anything," he said finally. "They know what they want to see," she murmured. "They'll learn different." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You can't fight the whole town, Elias. Don't need to. Just gotta live right." Her gaze softened, but the shadow of pain didn't leave her eyes. That night, she didn't hum as she cooked. When he thanked her for dinner, she nodded without meeting his gaze. Later, he found her outside near the corral, sitting on the fence rail, staring at the horizon. The moon painted everything silver. Her hair shimmered in the light. "You should be sleeping," he said gently. "So should you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Fair point." He walked closer, resting one hand on the fence beside her. "They'll stop talking eventually." "They won't," she said quietly. "People never forget what's different." "Then let them remember," he said. "We'll outlast their words." She turned toward him, her eyes catching the moonlight. "You believe that?" "I have to." For a long time they said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Sometimes I think I don't belong anywhere. Not with them. Not here." He reached out, his fingers brushing her sleeve. "You belong right here. I don't know how I ran this place without you." Her breath hitched. She turned away, blinking fast. "Don't say things you don't mean." "I mean every word," he said softly. She looked at him again, and for an instant the world narrowed to the space between them. The faint smell of hay, the whisper of wind, the soft thud of her heart echoing his. Then she slid down from the fence and walked toward the house without another word. Elias watched her go, feeling the weight of something he couldn't put back. That night he couldn't sleep. The image of her eyes, the hurt, the fear, the longing, wouldn't leave him. He poured a drink, then set it down untouched. He stood at the window, watching the moon dip low, whispering into the dark. "What are you doing to me, girl?" In her room, Tala sat by the window, the blanket around her shoulders. She had tried to pray but found no words. The world had always been cruel to her kind, but this was different. This was tenderness, and it terrified her more than chains ever had. The next morning, the air felt strange, heavy, expectant. Elias worked in the barn, pretending not to notice how quiet the house was. Tala didn't hum. She didn't speak much, either, but when she brought him water, her fingers brushed his, and neither of them pulled away. By afternoon, clouds gathered on the horizon, dark, swollen with rain. The storm rolled in fast, wind tearing through the valley. Elias hurried to bring the horses in, shouting over the thunder. Tala ran to help, skirts whipping around her legs. When a frightened colt reared near the gate, she stepped forward, whispering soothing words in her native tongue. The horse stilled, its breathing slowing. Elias watched her, soaked and trembling, hair plastered to her face, and thought she had never looked more alive. Lightning flashed and the rain came in torrents. He grabbed her arm, pulling her under the barn awning. She was shaking, water running down her cheeks like tears. "You're freezing," he said. "I'm fine," she gasped, but her voice trembled. Without thinking, he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her. She tried to protest, but he shook his head. "Hush, let me," Their faces were inches apart. The thunder rolled again, close this time. Her eyes lifted to his, and something passed between them. Something wordless but certain. "Elias," she whispered, his name strange and fragile on her lips. He swallowed hard. "Yeah?" Her gaze flicked to his mouth, then back to his eyes. "Nothing." He stepped back slowly, the air thick between them. "You should go inside." She nodded, clutching the coat tighter. When she was gone, he stood there a long time, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, his heart beating like a hammer in his chest. He knew then that he was already too far gone to pretend otherwise. Inside, Tala pressed her hands to her face, trying to steady her breath. The warmth of his coat clung to her skin, smelling faintly of tobacco and pine. She felt the world tilt, fragile and new, as if something sacred had shifted inside her. That night, when the storm finally quieted, she dreamed again. Not of her tribe, not of chains, but of a man standing in the rain, his hand outstretched, his voice calling her name as the dawn broke behind him. And though she did not know what would come next, she knew this: the heart, once it learns its own language, cannot be silenced. The summer heat came early that year, dry and sharp as a blade. The earth cracked beneath the horses' hooves, and every breath tasted of dust. The sky was a washed-out blue that promised no rain. On the ranch, time felt stretched thin, every day blending into the next, quiet but uneasy, like the world was holding its breath. Elias and Tala worked side by side, their movements steady and wordless. The fence posts leaned from age. They mended them together, sweat streaking both their faces. When he passed her the hammer, their fingers brushed, and she looked away quickly. Something unspoken had been growing between them, something fragile but real. They both felt it, though neither dared to name it. That morning, a rider appeared on the horizon, a dark shape moving fast through the shimmering heat. Elias shaded his eyes, frowning. Visitors were rare out this far. He watched the figure draw closer until he could see the dust rising from the horse's legs and the gleam of sunlight on metal. Tala stopped working, her body tense. She knew that look, a man riding hard with no kindness in his eyes. The hammer slipped from her fingers. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay here," he said. The rider pulled up at the gate, his horse snorting and pawing the dirt. He was lean, sunburned, with a beard that hadn't seen water in weeks. Two more riders followed behind, slower, heavier men with rifles slung across their backs. "Elias Hart!" the first one called, voice rough from whiskey and dust. "Heard you been harboring stolen property." Elias stepped forward, his expression hard. "Don't know what you're talking about." The man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Oh, I think you do. Apache girl, name of Tala, belongs to a trader out of Silver Gulch. Says she ran off after a sale went sour." Elias felt the air go still. "She doesn't belong to anyone." "Funny," the man said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Got a bill of sale here, says otherwise. Signed, stamped, and everything." Tala stepped out of the shadow of the barn, eyes blazing. "That's a lie." The man's grin widened. "Well, well, there she is. Thought you'd hide forever, little bird?" Elias's voice dropped low. "You best leave now." "Can't do that, friend," the man replied. "We've been paid to bring her back. You can hand her over easy, or we can make it hard. Don't matter much to us." Elias's hand went to the revolver at his hip. "You'll ride off this land before sundown, or you'll be carried off it." The riders exchanged glances. The leader spat into the dust. "You got grit, old man. Shame it'll get you killed." He turned his horse with a flick of the reins. "We'll be back at dawn. Don't say we didn't warn you." They rode off in a swirl of dust, leaving the air heavy behind them. Tala ran to Elias, her face pale. "You can't fight them. They'll bring more men." He holstered his gun. "I faced worse." She shook her head, gripping his sleeve. "Not for me. Please, Elias." His voice softened. "They're not taking you. Not now. Not ever." That night, the sky grew dark with storm clouds, though no rain came. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the shutters. Tala couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the distant flicker of lightning. Elias was outside, checking the gates, loading his rifle, moving with the quiet certainty of a man who knew what danger smelled like. When he came back inside, she was waiting by the hearth. "If I go," she said quietly, "they'll leave you alone." He set his rifle down. "Don't you dare. You don't understand." "I do." He stepped closer, his voice rough with feeling. "You think you're a burden, but you're not. You think I saved you, but the truth is, you saved me." Her breath caught. "Why do you say that?" "Because before you, this place was nothing but ghosts. Now it's got life again. I can't lose that." For a moment, they just stood there, the firelight flickering between them. Then, without thinking, he reached out and cupped her face in his hand. Her skin was warm beneath his calloused fingers. She didn't move. "Elias," she whispered. He dropped his hand and stepped back, jaw tight. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's gonna be long." She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid, that she trusted him more than she'd ever trusted anyone. But the words wouldn't come. She turned away, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Outside, thunder rolled like a warning. At dawn, the riders returned. 5 of them this time. Dust rose around their horses as they fanned out across the yard. The leader dismounted, smirking. "We warned you, Hart. Now we're taken. What's ours?" Elias stood on the porch, rifle in hand. "She's not yours. Law says otherwise." "The law's wrong." The man laughed. "You think you can fight all of us?" Elias raised his rifle. "I've got enough bullets to try." The first shot cracked the silence. The bullet slammed into the post beside his head, splintering wood. Tala screamed. Elias fired back, the recoil jolting his shoulder. One rider fell from his horse. The others spread out, firing from behind the fence. Smoke filled the air. Horses screamed. Elias ducked behind a barrel, returning fire. "Stay down," he shouted. Tala crawled across the floor to the window, heart pounding. She saw him reload, move, fire again. Then one of the men crept around the side of the barn, rifle raised. Without thinking, she grabbed Elias's old pistol from the table and ran outside. The wind tore at her hair, dust stinging her eyes. She aimed with shaking hands. "Stop!" she cried. The man turned, sneering. "Go back inside, girl!" The shot rang out. He dropped where he stood. The pistol kicked hard, nearly knocking her off balance. Elias turned at the sound and froze when he saw her standing there, trembling but unbroken. "Tala! I won't let them take you!" she shouted. He wanted to yell at her to get back inside, but another shot rang out, and pain exploded in his side. He stumbled, falling to one knee. The world tilted, the ground rushing up to meet him. Tala screamed his name and ran to him, dropping to the dirt beside him. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and spreading. He tried to push her away. "Get inside!" "No," she sobbed. "Not without you." She dragged him toward the house as bullets tore through the walls. Somehow they made it through the door. She slammed it shut and barred it, then pressed her hand to his wound. "Hold on!" His breath came in ragged gasps. "Listen to me. There's a rifle by the window. If they come through, you aim for the chest. Don't hesitate." She shook her head, tears streaking her face. "I can't." "Yes, you can. You've got more fight in you than anyone I've ever known." Outside, the men shouted, arguing whether to rush the house or retreat. Finally, the leader's voice rang out. "We'll be back, Hart. You can't hide her forever." The sound of hooves thundered away into the distance. Tala held her breath until silence returned. Then she turned back to Elias. His skin was pale, his lips tight with pain. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound. He winced but didn't push her away. "Why would you do this for me?" she whispered. His eyes fluttered open. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." She pressed her forehead to his, whispering something in her native tongue. A prayer, a plea, a promise. The fire crackled softly, the only witness to the sound of her tears. Hours passed. The storm that had threatened all night finally broke, rain drumming against the roof. She stayed by his side, changing the bandage, wiping the sweat from his brow. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling her name, sometimes his wife's. Each time he said, "Tala," her heart broke a little more. When the rain eased, she stepped outside to the porch, exhaustion weighing on her. The air smelled of wet earth and gunpowder. She could see the bodies in the yard, the men who hadn't ridden away. She buried them quietly before dawn, her hands shaking as she covered the last mound of dirt. Then she returned to the house and knelt beside him again. His eyes opened, faint but clear. "You stayed," he murmured. "Of course I stayed." He smiled weakly. "You're the stubborn one. Someone had to learn from you." He laughed, then groaned at the pain. She pressed his hand gently. "Rest. I'll keep watch." As the first light of morning broke, she sat by the window, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. The world outside was quiet again, but she knew peace would not last. Still, for now, he was alive. They both were. When Elias stirred hours later, the light fell soft across his face. He blinked at her and whispered, "You should have run." She smiled faintly. "You told me once not to turn away from what's right." He looked at her for a long time, then closed his eyes again. "Guess I did." She brushed the hair from his forehead. "Sleep, Elias. You're safe." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the air smelled clean. The world felt fragile, but somehow new. For the first time since the day she'd been captured, Tala felt something like freedom, not the kind that comes from running, but the kind that comes from choosing to stay. As the sun rose over Red Mesa, its light spilling across the battered ranch, she whispered to herself, "He saved me once. Now I'll save him." She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that when dawn came again, she would be there beside him, watching the light return to the world they were both learning to fight for. And for the first time in her life, the rising sun did not frighten her. It felt like a promise. The morning came soft and golden, spilling light over the ranch like a quiet blessing. The rain from the night before had washed the dust from the earth, leaving everything smelling new. The sky stretched endless above, clear and blue as a promise. Inside the small ranch house, the world was still, except for the slow, even sound of breathing. Elias lay on the bed, pale but alive. The bandages around his side were clean now, changed through the night by careful hands. Beside him, Tala sat in a wooden chair, her head resting on her arms. She hadn't slept in 2 days. The fire had long gone out, but the warmth of dawn took its place. When he stirred, she lifted her head, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Hey," he murmured. She sat upright instantly. "You're awake." "For the moment," he said, his voice hoarse. "You look worse than me." She let out a small laugh, half relief, half exhaustion. "You almost died." He smiled weakly. "Would've, if you hadn't been stubborn." "You taught me that," she said softly. He looked at her then. Really looked. The smudges under her eyes, the streak of dried blood on her sleeve, the strand of hair that had fallen loose from its braid. His heart ached with something deeper than pain. "You should rest," he said. "I will, when you do." He sighed, the sound faint but content. "Hard-headed woman. Only when I need to be." The quiet between them was tender, the kind of silence that holds more words than speech ever could. Outside, the wind whispered across the grass, and a hawk called high above the mesas. By midday, the doctor from town finally arrived, an old man named Amos, who had delivered Elias's wife years ago. He took one look at the two of them and shook his head. "He's lucky to be breathing," he muttered as he unwrapped the bandages. Tala stood back, wringing her hands. Elias watched her, then said, "She saved me." The doctor grunted. "Then she's got more sense than you. You planning to pick fights with every fool west of the river?" "Only the ones that deserve it," Amos snorted. "Then you'll be dead before the harvest." He cleaned the wound, repacked it, and gave Tala a list of things to do. Rest, broth, fresh bandages, no heavy work. "You keep him still," he said, wagging a finger at her. "If he moves too much, he'll tear himself open again." When the doctor left, she turned to Elias with a firm look. "You heard him. No moving." He groaned. "You planning to tie me down?" "If I have to," he chuckled. "You'd probably win too." Over the next few days, the ranch fell into a slower rhythm. Tala spent her mornings tending the animals, her afternoons by his bedside. She spoke little, but when she did, it was often to tell stories, small pieces of her life before the raid, before captivity. Elias would listen quietly, eyes half closed, his fingers tracing idle patterns on the blanket. "I used to sit by the river every evening," she told him one day. "The water would catch the sun and look like fire. My mother said it was where the world began." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it was." She tilted her head. "Do you have a place like that?" He was quiet for a moment. "I did. It was here before I lost her." "Your wife?" He nodded. "We used to sit out back and watch the storms roll in. She loved the rain, said it reminded her that the earth could cry too." Tala looked toward the window where sunlight poured through the glass. "Maybe it's crying for joy now." He laughed softly. "You always find a way to make things sound better than they are." "Maybe," she said. "But sometimes you have to believe good things are still coming, or you forget how to wait for them." He stared at her for a long moment, realizing she wasn't speaking from hope alone. She was speaking from survival. As the weeks passed, his strength returned. The wound closed, leaving a thin scar. He started walking again, slowly, with her arm under his. Each morning they'd step out onto the porch together. The horizon seemed wider now, the air sharper, the silence peaceful instead of hollow. One morning, while the sun was just beginning to rise, he looked at her and said, "You could still go." She frowned. "Go where?" "Anywhere." "There's nothing keeping you here but me." She shook her head. "That's enough." He studied her face, the certainty in her eyes. "You mean that?" "I do." Something in him broke then, quiet and gentle, like ice melting. He reached out, brushing his thumb across her cheek. She didn't pull away. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but you're what I chose." The words hung between them, trembling like a heartbeat. That evening, the town sent word. Sheriff Davis wanted to see Elias. The riders who'd attacked had been found. 2 dead, 3 gone east. The law was closing in, but the message was clear. They wouldn't forget. Elias read the note, folded it slowly, and tossed it into the fire. Tala watched it burn. "They'll come back someday." "Maybe," he said, "but they won't find me unready." She laid a hand on his arm. "We'll face it together." The way she said we settled deep inside him, steady as truth. The next morning, he walked down to the creek for the first time since being shot. Tala followed, carrying a basket of laundry. The water was cold and clear, rushing over smooth stones. He sat on the bank while she knelt beside the stream, washing shirts in the current. "You make that look easy," he said. "Everything's easy when you've done it your whole life." He smiled. "Guess that's how I feel about mending fences." She splashed water toward him playfully. "Then maybe we trade jobs." He laughed, a sound that startled even him. "I think you'd run this place better than I ever did." The sun shimmered on the surface of the water. For a long while they didn't speak. The only sounds were the river and the whisper of the breeze through cottonwood leaves. When she finished, she stood and wrung out the last of the clothes. Elias watched her, the sunlight turning her hair to bronze, the water catching the color of her skin. There was peace in her now. Fragile, yes, but real. He rose slowly, stepping closer. "Tala," she turned. "Yes?" "I've been trying to find the right words for weeks," he said. "But there aren't any. Not really." Her heart pounded. "Then don't use words. Just speak." He took her hand, rough and small, in his. "You changed this place. You changed me. I thought my life ended the day I buried her, but it didn't. It was waiting for you." Tears filled her eyes. "You shouldn't say things like that unless you mean them." "I mean every word," he said. "I've never been more certain of anything." She stepped closer, the sound of water between them. Her hand trembled as she touched his chest, just above the scar. "Then promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. Don't shut the world out again, not even if I'm gone." He caught her hand, holding it tight. "You're not going anywhere." Their foreheads touched, the moment stretching out between breath and heartbeat. The world faded to wind and water and warmth. Then he kissed her, slow, certain, reverent. It wasn't the hunger of youth. It was the quiet recognition of two souls who had found home in each other. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled through her tears. "You taste like rain," he chuckled. "Guess your world and mine aren't so different after all." They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, the sky blooming orange behind them. That night, they sat together on the porch as the stars came out. The crickets sang, and somewhere far off a coyote called. Elias leaned back, his arm around her shoulders. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "Sometimes," she said. "But then I think of you, and the thought disappears." He smiled. "You ever think about staying forever?" She looked up at the stars. Every day, weeks passed, and the town's whispers began to fade. People talked less, worked more. The trader who had claimed ownership of her was gone, shot in a gambling dispute across the state line. Red Mesa forgot quickly, as towns do. But on the ranch, nothing was forgotten. Every scar on the fence, every patched wall, every sunrise told the story of what they'd survived. One morning, months later, Elias woke to the sound of laughter. He stepped outside and found Tala in the garden, bare feet in the dirt, planting flowers near the porch. "Didn't know we had seeds," he said. "I traded for them last week," she replied. He crouched beside her, watching as she covered the roots gently with soil. "What kind are they?" "Wild sage and bluebells. They'll bloom in the spring." He smiled. "Figures you'd plant something that smells like hope." She looked up at him, sunlight on her face. "That's all I've ever wanted here." "Hope." He reached out, tipping his hat back. "You already brought it." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "Then I guess we're even." The wind stirred the blossoms, carrying their scent across the yard. Later that evening, they rode together to the top of the ridge overlooking the valley. The sunset burned gold and crimson across the horizon. Tala sat sideways on the horse, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "I used to think the sun was cruel," she said softly. "It took everything from me." He looked down at her. "And now?" "Now I think it just had to set before it could rise again." He smiled, pulling her closer. "You were going to be sold at dawn," he murmured, "and I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "But you gave me my morning back?" He kissed her hair. "No, darling, you gave me mine." The last light of the day touched their faces, warm and full. Around them, the desert bloomed with color, the kind only seen at the edge of twilight, when night is close and everything feels eternal. They stayed there until the stars appeared, holding each other as the world turned quietly below. And when they rode back down toward the ranch, the house ahead glowed softly in the darkness, its windows like lanterns guiding them home. For the first time in their lives, they didn't feel like survivors. They felt like people who had finally found where they belonged. And as the dawn came again, spreading light across Red Mesa, the wind carried her laughter through the open plains, a sound that promised that no matter how cruel the world once was, love had found its way home again. In a land where the sun burned cruel and the nights whispered with ghosts, two broken souls found a reason to stay. Tala was meant to be sold at dawn, and Elias was a man long past believing in second chances. But fate doesn't ask for permission. It just rides in on the wind and changes everything. From the dust of despair rose a love that healed more than wounds. It healed hearts. And in that quiet ranch beneath the endless western sky, they discovered that sometimes the most beautiful sunrises come after the darkest nights. If you felt the warmth of their story, don't let it fade with the sunset. Subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles and ride with us through more tales of courage, redemption, and love born from the untamed heart of the frontier. Because out here in the Wild West, every dawn tells a new story.